Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
So I think last year with Lucas Raymond, it was 12 pounds of muscle. I think Edvinsson said he was like 16 pounds heavier, or anywhere from like a dozen to 16 pounds heavier. He said he ate avocados, so it's a different kind.
Love that.
Kidding, of course. But so it stands to reason that as the decades go by, we are going to have some gargantuan Red Wings if this trend continues. Evan, you might have a chance.
I was about to say, should we announce how much weight we've gained in the offseason?
Oh, God. Look, as I'm fighting this hernia that I have to wait to have treated, this sports hernia, like I've actually lost weight.
Am I the least injured person on the podcast right now?
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Because your some CL blew up in your knee.
Something. We're going to find out tonight or tomorrow morning.
And you're a pickleball superstar because you got
That's right.
demolished on the golf course. So
Yes.
you're the most qualified to gain weight and make the Detroit Red Wings. But it's funny to see the tradition continue with Lucas Raymond before and now Simon Edvinsson. So we'll see what Brandsegg-Nygard gains next season, inevitably. Training camp in Traverse City is done. On to the preseason. The Winged Wheel Podcast offseason is over, as we mentioned last episode. Folks, welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we're going to be talking about the many takeaways and conversations coming after Detroit Red Wings training camp in Traverse City. Players like Simon Edvinsson, where he's going to fit into the top four, how the young guys acquitted themselves between Kasper, Danielson, Mazur, and others, the goalie situation with Ville Husso factoring into that mix and what's going to happen there, notes from Newsy and others, and everything else from Red Wings training camp. It's still too early to say, but this is when the conversations start to go. And then we're going to be getting into a lot of different news from the NHL. Ottawa is just having a renaissance in terms of the anti-Melnyk with their ownership group there and potentially, finally, an arena deal. And then kind of under the radar news, but the CHL-NCAA disagreement that's been going on in court, that might be headed to a very productive place for hockey. We'll be talking about Swayman, Evander Kane, the Amazon NHL series, all of that and lots more before jumping into overtime. Before all that, we want to let you know two things. First, Winged Wheel Podcast Night at the LCA in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings, Saturday, November 9th. Your ticket gets you access to a pregame live recording of the show featuring us, the hosts of the Winged Wheel Podcast, Ken Daniels, Max Bultman, Winged Wheel Podcast contributor. In addition to that meet and greet and pregame live show, you also get a custom co-branded, officially licensed Detroit Red Wings and Winged Wheel Podcast jersey giveaway. So wingedwheelpodcast.com/Red Wings to get your tickets. I think there are like 30 or 40 left. The live show, the jersey, the meet and greet, and of course the game on Saturday, November 9th against the Rangers. Get your tickets today. We've already added as many as we can. Once they run out, they are out. Secondly, this show is primarily supported by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to support the show, you get access to benefits like bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones, any bonus content we put out there, a fantastic Discord community where you can talk about hockey, prospects, the Red Wings, the rest of the league, the Lions, the Tigers, and a million other things. You're also automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, we give away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, the vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Training camp already being done seems fast, but there are, already topics of conversation coming out of what's going to happen with the Red Wings. The biggest thing that we've been talking about all offseason is this is a jam-packed roster, and it still feels like moves need to be made. We'll get into that later. First and foremost, I think let's talk about Simon Edvinsson, because he's the topic of a lot of conversation. Where is he going to end up this year? How did he do in training camp in your guys' mind?
Well, from all reports, he looked good. He's obviously gained weight. Newsy has already said the plan is for him to be in the top 4, which was very great to hear this early in training camp. It's a brave new world under this regime. And, it sounds like he's going to be partnered up with Petry again. It's funny, someone actually messaged me about that today, and I was like, hey, I don't know what to make of Jeff Petry at this point, but him and Simon Edvinsson were serviceable as a pairing in the stretch run for the Red Wings, which is, a far cry from great, but Petry was getting demolished before that pairing was put together. So that's a testament to how good Simon Edvinsson finished last year. So if there's any improvement whatsoever, which it sounds like there's a lot of, that could be really, really big in terms of the conversation we had last week about shoring up that defense long term.
I thought Edvinsson looked really good in the red and white game today. Obviously, the intensity level is up there, but questionable at best, I'd say. But I thought he was very confident on and off the puck, got involved physically. So he's looks like a guy who's could easily play in the top 4 this year. And, he's eating all those avocados, won't be able to afford a house. So hopefully.
No, there was no mention of bread.
That is true.
That's where he's saving the money.
We'll edit that. We'll take that out. But it was another good step and another good sign of confidence for the fans watching Simon Edvinsson this past week.
With all the attention on Mo Seider and when's he going to sign, and then, is he worth the money and how much money is he worth? There was a lot of focus on what he brings to the roster and the fact that he's carried this defense for as long as he's been in Detroit. And the thing that we've repeated time and time again is that Simon Edvinsson is the first true potential top pairing defenseman to make the roster since Mo Seider came on board. Now, they have other guys in the system that could also challenge for that. Axel Sandin-Pellikka comes to mind, even though he also plays on the right side like Mo Seider. But Simon Edvinsson this year, not to sound like a broken record, he could be the single biggest impact player that doesn't have a blocker and a trapper on when he's out on the ice. Like, if Simon Edvinsson can come out and have himself a really strong season, then Detroit's entire calculus on defense changes for the better. It gives Newsy more opportunities to create lineups and pairings that work and aren't a net negative out on the ice. And it's not a silver bullet. Like, if Simon Edvinsson comes out and is unreal, that's definitely not a silver bullet, because if they want to put him up on the top pairing with Mo Seider, well, Derek Lalonde said, then we'll try Chiarot and Petry together because they have some experience. And to put it plainly, that doesn't inspire confidence. It could work. You've seen randomly on the Red Wings pairings that you thought wouldn't work do for one reason or another. Edvinsson and Petry being one of them. Edvinsson talks very fondly of Petry and, spending time together in the offseason and things like that. But all that aside, if Edvinsson can elevate his game and really take a big leap this year, then yeah, that is the first piece of low-hanging fruit that the Red Wings can grab to pull this defense out of the gutter. And the one thing that really I think gets overlooked in terms of what's in Simon Edvinsson's favor, as much as it's an unfair expectation to ask him to be a top pairing defenseman this year, is that he's already played a good amount of NHL games. Like, this isn't new to him. He knows what to expect, and that's worth a lot more than what I think people realize. The shock and awe of being in the NHL, playing at NHL pace, having to make decisions. Like, he's done his time in Grand Rapids, and he's played a good amount in the NHL. He's not eligible for the Calder Trophy, and so, yeah, is he a rookie for all intents and purposes? Sure, but he also has a leg up.
He's also never played 82 games in a season, which is going to be one of his bigger challenges this year, because we've seen time and time again, rookies come out of the gate hot, and then the grind of the season just wears on them and they slow down, especially if you're a defenseman, and especially if you play a style of physical D like Simon Edvinsson does. So I think you're right, and it's a good point that, he's not going to be the baby deer in the headlights in the early parts of the season. And I think he'll do fine there, and he's going to learn as the season goes on. And I've been on the train of keeping him and Seider separated for the exact fear of a Chiarot-Petry pairing. But that means he is going to have to do the heavy lifting on that pairing. So I think his biggest challenge this year will be January, February, March, April. Just keeping that intensity, that pace, and not letting any part of his game slip.
To Derek Lalonde's credit, he did say, like, that top 4 is going to be fluid. They're going to have to figure out things as they go. And he, named who he thought would be in the top 4 to start, which is Seider, Edvinsson, Chiarot, Petry, based on experience and what they did for the Red Wings last season. But at the same time, he mentioned he wants to see players like Gustafsson or others play into the top 4 and get into the mix. The Red Wings aren't blind to this, right? Like, you look at this defense on paper. And unless there are surprises for anyone who's not Seider or Edvinsson, and really Chiarot and Petry because they're known quantities, like you know what they're going to be able to do and what you're likely going to have to work with. How these players acquit themselves on the ice is going to dictate how they pair up. Because the Red Wings now have one other solid piece full-time in Edvinsson, it means they can make decisions a little bit more productively to put a guy out of the top four when they otherwise weren't able to last year. I don't think completely, because I still think the right side, like if Gustafsson can't stick on the right side on the second pair at 5-on-5, they're probably going to have to hang with Petry there, which means, yeah, you're right, Brett. It's probably going to be Edvinsson there no matter what. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what I'm trying to say is it's the defense is still patchwork, but it is a lot more solid if Edvinsson is closer to Mo than not.
Well, they can load manage Simon Edvinsson better than Moritz Seider, because when Moritz Seider was on the team, it was just him. Simon Edvinsson has the advantage of having Moritz Seider there to be the workhorse. The deck is a little bit better or more in Simon Edvinsson's favor than it was for Moritz Seider when he made the Red Wings.
I also think Gustafsson's probably the leading candidate to quarterback power play one, quite honestly. So, and I think they might even go with, like, they were talking at camp about trying out combinations, players who had experience with each other, Gustafsson with other Red Wings. So, yeah, you're right. You can load manage in a lot of creative ways. And the bar is through the floor. Like, let's just name that. We're talking, they can load manage a lot of creative ways. What I mean is they've added one more good defenseman at worst, maybe a couple. It's about getting this back up to league average. This is why I'm so much more confident in the offense than the defense, because the offense has finally started to make this progress over the past couple of years. The defense is still, it's a slow churn to turn around your defense.
You can also have in-game management, right? If they did want to try Seider and Edvinsson, if Edvinsson's having a season that makes that a worthwhile experiment, a lot of top D pairs play 25 to 30 minutes a game, right? And if Seider and Edvinsson are playing well, then all of a sudden you've got a pretty serviceable third pairing, which I think a combination of Gustafsson, Maatta, Johansson could be. Then you don't need to put too much on Chiarot and Petry, right? They play 15 to 17 minutes. They're not getting the tough matchups. That could be an option as well. I don't love that as much, and I do have concerns about throwing Edvinsson for 30 minutes against McDavid's, Crosby's, Matthews of the world, but it is an option if the other option isn't working.
I'd love to see it in preseason.
That's what it's for. That's the whole takeaway from training camp is you can't make any decisions. Preseason is honestly when you're going to see how these things shake out. Preseason is when we saw that Nate Danielson was probably good enough to make the Red Wings last year.
And that's why Traverse City is such a hard way to measure where players are at or if they'll make the team, because you see this mix of intensity. Some guys are there to just sort of get their touches in and get the game sense a little bit back in check. So it'll be interesting when the preseason games start this week, like how they put some lines together, especially with the defensive core with Simon Edvinsson. Will they put him with Moritz Seider and see how he lines up against some of the big boys? It'll be fascinating.
Something about this defense as well that I think a lot about is like, yeah, you know how much talent you're working with. And Steve Yzerman and Derek Lalonde have kind of mentioned this in the past. I think this defense is projected to play mean. Like, I think they want them out there, like hacking, whacking, making your life miserable. Like, what do the Red Wings lack? They lack really true top four talent through all top four positions. Let's be honest about that. But what do they not lack is size. And so they're going to leverage that. They are going to leverage that with cross checks across your arm and, you know, making your life miserable. And they're going to just play a physical style of game. And you can't really fault that. That's kind of what you have to do. And so when you look at Ben Chiarot, Jeff Petry, like that's what their goal out there is going to be like. And it's going to be a pain in the ass to play against. And they're going to get beat, you know, cleanly by skilled offensive players. And is it not going to be perfect? But that's kind of the strategy you have to take. I think
they're going to get beat at some point anyway by skilled players, so they may as well try and line somebody up.
That's right. Take a pound of flesh, let them know that they can bleed, and you throw them off their game that way.
Except for the bottom pair.
Well,
hey, we love Maatta, and Gustafsson's going to be great, but they are probably lacking in that department you were just referencing. That being said, the entire top four more than makes up for it.
Well, either fortunately or unfortunately for the Red Wings, I think two of their most physical defensemen are also their best defensemen. So that is definitely a blessing and a curse, I think.
We'll see how it goes. It's pretty early in the season to pull that line out. Anyhow, the defense will be fluid, and there's just no surprises there. But thank goodness for the avocados. And my God, Edvinsson's probably excited to get off his rookie salary because, like you said, Evan,
yeah,
it's not cheap. Elsewhere, between training camp and the red and white game, what do you guys think of let's call it the trio of rookies or young forwards who people really have their eyes on to potentially make the team, or who would have the best chance if there were spaces, which is Danielson, Kasper, and Mazur? Because I think at different points I've heard people praise each one of them individually for their performances.
Well, like you said, every one of them has been praised, which is a good sign that nobody's blowing it. But like you already alluded to with Danielson, it was preseason that made it last year. So the fact none of them look out of place or a step behind is the win that this team needed to get out of training camp. And now the hope is that, one of them or two of them will step into preseason like Danielson did last year and really put the franchise on notice that I'm here to stay. Because I did see a lot, specifically about Kasper, in terms of, I don't know how to phrase it. The quote I kept seeing is he looks different. There's just like, he had a good off season. So that could be he's a little more physically prepared, or he worked on X, Y, or Z in his skill set. But either way, going into preseason, nobody's at a disadvantage. It's up for grabs. Well, kind of up for grabs. Hopefully one of them can grab it.
Kasper and Mazur especially, like, they just came off of a really strong run with the Grand Rapids Griffins. And so they've shown themselves at the AHL level. Derek Lalonde and Steve Yzerman made note of that. That's no secret. And so that is in their favor. And for Nate Danielson, he lacks the AHL experience, but he almost blew the doors off last season and probably justified a spot if the Red Wings were in a weaker position last season. He very well could have been a Red Wing. So for me, when people say, I wish there were spots this year because any one of these guys could make it, I still think the opportunity is there for them where if in preseason they make it an extremely difficult decision, the Red Wings are already in a spot in their roster where they probably have to make a move at some point, whether it's at goalie or somewhere else, to make the lineup make a bit more sense, unless they want to be carrying three goalies and run 11-7 or whatever they do. Force them to make a decision. I don't think Steve Yzerman's scared to do that. I think Steve Yzerman wants competition, and part of that is if someone wins who wasn't predicted, well, then someone's losing their job and they get waived or they get traded or whatever it might be.
There's this notion that players are immune from being waived or sent down or traded. That's certainly not the case in this instance. I think if Danielson, Kasper, Mazur have an incredible preseason, somebody will get moved, whether that be, and I feel bad pulling names out right now because that's not fair to them. We still have preseason to go. But someone like Mott, Fisher, Veleno even, you make room for the guys who earn it. So I think we'll see how it plays out. But I think all three have a outside chance of making the team.
Well, that would depend largely on what they choose to do with the other positions as well. Because as the roster sits right now, when you look at the quote-unquote projected NHL rosters, this team is going to be carrying 12 forwards, 8D, and 3 goalies, which is a terrible formula to go into the season with. Not impossible, especially if Lalonde decides he wants to run 11-7 instead of the traditional 12-6. But right now, you look at those top 12 forwards, you can pretty much write them in stone, unless you're talking about a trade or something. Now, if they trade a goalie or they decide to only carry 7 defensemen and someone like a Justin Holl goes down to the minors, okay, now a spot opens up at forward. Could be Austin Watson, but that would be the boring answer. But in reality, the hope would be one of those 3 rookies would grab that spot.
Kane mentioned Carter Mazur's release. That was the truest indication that every one of these guys could possibly make the team this year and make a positive impact. I know we beat this horse dead and then more afterwards, but I really do wish there were a couple of spots in this team because I think yeah, there are growing pains, and it's not easy being a rookie in the NHL, and you're going to see some of the best rookies in the league still struggle. There's a lot of conversation about that this year. Just because you're talented doesn't mean you're automatically good in the NHL, but with Mazur and Kasper, like, start them on the wing. Like, I think they could play those depth roles effectively.
The NHL keeps getting younger and younger, and the NHL is now sort of run by the younger guys. So if the Red Wings don't make the playoffs and don't have any true rookies in the lineup, that's a lose-lose for everyone.
We just went through that season.
Yes.
If they do it again, yeah, that's catastrophic. Now, again, Edvinsson being the notable exception because of that weird status that he has. He's basically a rookie this year, even though he got into a handful of games last year. But again, you either are winning or you're developing. And the worst case scenario for the Red Wings is neither happens. And again, we've talked about this a lot. I know I've mentioned this specifically a lot, and it's worth repeating. I don't really care about the opening night lineup all that much. If there's no Danielson, Kasper, or Mazur there, it's not the end of the world. They might only be carrying 12 forwards, which means a single injury forces a call-up. At that point, if that happens and the call-up's another seasoned veteran of the AHL like Austin Czarnik, I'm going to be upset.
It's going to be this year, Sheldon Dries is this year's Austin Czarnik.
Exactly. So if and I'm sure he's a great player, great guy, whatever, but it shouldn't be him. Like, with where the organization is at, it better be a Mazur, Kasper, or Danielson, whether that's opening night, Halloween, American Thanksgiving. I don't care. But if we're sitting here in January, to Evan's point, and they are not firmly in a playoff spot, it's a huge, huge waste of a half a season.
I think for me, the question remains, what is the metric, what is the bar, the measuring stick to determine if one of those three make the lineup? Is this, they're a point per game, a half point per game in the preseason? Is it the eye test where it looks like they belong, they're confident, they're driving play? So I don't know where I fall there, but I think you kind of know it when you see it. And maybe that's a really bad way to measure, but I think that's how I sort of looked at it last year with Danielson too.
The real answer is both. Like, you have to, if you're taking a job from an established NHL player, there can't be any room for doubt. And that's how every NHL organization operates, unless they are in the absolute throes of a rebuild. And even the Red Wings never really operated on the free spots for rookies, even when they were parading out Luke Glendening on the first line. Danielson last year looked great. We were watching games going, he is one of the best Red Wings on the ice. And then at the end of the night, you're like, he had a goal and an assist. There are the stats. There's the production. And that was consistent throughout the entire preseason, because two things have to happen in order for a rookie to make the NHL. One, he's got to prove it, like we were just talking about. And two, you got to figure out where to plug him in, right? If all of a sudden you don't want to mess with your shutdown line for this hypothetical, let's say that's Rasmussen, Kopp, and Fisher again, you need him to produce because he's not playing in a shutdown role, or he is going to play in a shutdown role. Can you plug him in on that line? Is his defense refined enough that he can play in that spot? Now, given the Red Wings prospects we are talking about, I really hope they don't deploy them in that fashion. But yeah, if you're playing with Berggren and Veleno and your expectation is to play 12 minutes a night, but we need a little bit of offense out of you, it's got to be there.
I'm glad you keep saying, like, opening night roster isn't the be-all, end-all, and you can have opinions, of course, on who should have made it. I think we did last season too, but that doesn't dictate how you feel about the whole season. Because like you said, how you perform in the AHL, where these guys are likely to go, and who gets injured and who gets called up, and you have to consider context. If you need someone up for one game and you know it's only absolutely going to be one game, then that's a different story than you need someone for a couple of weeks kind of thing. And that is all worth considering. Remember, Elmer Soderblom made the Red Wings out of camp. It was a surprise, roster spot, and he deserved it. And then he lost his spot because he kind of got injured, couldn't stay healthy, couldn't really keep up with the pace of the NHL, and he's not even been in conversation since to realistically threaten to make this team. And some people get frustrated by that, but it's no secret he's down that pecking order. Like, that's just not where he's at. And so a lot can happen on opening night, and it's exciting to see that roster, but it is far, far, far from the be-all, end-all for who can make the Red Wings. Brad, you alluded to other positions maybe dictating roster spots, and the big one is goalie. Now, we'll talk about how Cossa performed in a second, but the general thought is in the AHL, you're going to have Cossa, you're going to have Campbell with him, and that's, the veteran presence, teach him how to be a pro, provide some stability, and that's, worst case injury insurance down there, because if you need to call someone up and you're in the middle of a playoff hunt and you don't want to throw Cossa to the Wolves. And then they have to do something with Lyon, Husso, and the newcomer now, Cam Talbot, who is poised to be like a 1A, 1B in their minds, ideally. Husso was injured all last year. He was either, for the most part, bad when he was playing, maybe had a few decent games in there, but then got hurt and then hurt again. He just couldn't stay on the ice. Husso says he feels great. Now, it's a matter of him being comfortable, but let's say he comes out in preseason. I'm sure he's going to get a ton of work in preseason because they need to assess where he is and if he's actually ready for gameplay. If you have 3 capable goalies, there probably has to be a decision made there. Not has to, as in like if they can't, meet the requirements for an NHL roster, but I don't think they want to do the 3 goalie dance this year. And I shouldn't even say I don't think. Steve Yzerman has said he doesn't want to do the 3 goalie dance again this year.
It's a not great situation all around, if I'm being honest. If we go by the hypothetical of Campbell going to the AHL, and I'll start there. Is Jack Campbell too good to be Sebastian Cossa's backup? Because I think everybody agreed this past season was the year for Cossa to take the starting job, split the load with Hutchison, and then, hopefully he grabs the reins and then finishes the season as a starter. He did that. So this season would be we probably want him playing 60 to 75% of the games. Are you really going to have Jack Campbell play that few games in the AHL? Especially,
yeah, why not?
I would say, yeah, why not? But that's not how these teams operate, right? If Jack Campbell's putting up a 918, are you...
Okay, let's pump the brakes
he
for 2 seconds.
He had a good season last year in the AHL after that hilarious start.
Yeah, but
he has... That might be one of the biggest falls from grace we've seen in the NHL.
In the NHL.
All my concern, I can't believe we're starting with Jack Campbell.
I know.
My concerns are at the NHL level. Because in the
it's going to
AHL,
lead to my next point.
But hold on, they signed Jack Campbell. Jack Campbell could have been signed by anyone. He signed in Detroit for low money, no money for this point in his career. It's because he got a big gift from the Edmonton Oilers to not play hockey for them anymore. And I have to imagine the conversation with Jack Campbell was, you're there for stability. Cossa is still a developing goalie. And you know what? The AHL schedule and the travel is a grind. So you don't really want your goalie playing as many or such a huge percentage of games and burn him out. And so to me, I see stability, at the very least, support for that. And then if Cossa needs a little bit of a break, then I think I'm really confident that they're going to err towards Cossa here, and Campbell is there just to be, his rock and the team's rock.
I hope so. And some teams operate like that. Some teams don't. We haven't seen Grand Rapids in that type of situation before, and I have faith in Dan Watson, so I'm assuming Cossa is still going to shoulder the load. But where Campbell would come in handy and where he is the ideal candidate to have in the AHL is if they had 2 goalies in the NHL, because he is the perfect guy to call up and spot fill as a backup in case of injury, because then you're letting Cossa run through his season in the AHL like everybody wants him to, and you're not calling him up to the NHL to back up or barely play or get shelled when he's not ready. But you're carrying 3 goalies, so if there's an injury, obviously that's not going to happen. And we've heard goalies talk about they don't like playing in a 3 goalie system. It gets them out of their rhythm, it gets them out of their timing. So I'm in the camp of, I do not care which one. Honestly, they have to trade one of the 3 NHL guys before the season opens. Injuries happen. There might be a team that gets needy. Like before Vancouver signed Lankin, and they were looking prime for, we need a goalie yesterday. But you just signed Talbot. You're probably not trading him. Husso makes almost $5 million and has been underwhelming for 2 seasons. Do you think there's a team that would take him for free?
I heard San Jose owes the Red Wings a favor too.
That could be it, but they're carrying Vanacek and Blackwood. Hey, I know they don't inspire confidence, but that's 2 NHL level goalies. And, they just traded for Askarov. Lyon makes under $1 million a year.
Yeah.
And he was the best of the Red Wings goalies last year.
And that was a feature of his contract, though. Like we said, like you're not worried about any of those three guys that you just listed being goalies of the future. I love Alex Lyon. I hope he stays on the Red Wings. I would love a future where, Cossa ends up taking the reins from Lyon or something like that in the future. But if you have value in a trade for him, because that contract is fantastic, and you can confidently tell a team, hey, this guy can play 35 to 40 really great games for you, then that's what you do. We talk a lot on this show about you have to make tough decisions as a GM to really preserve your long-term vision. And the only time you stray from that is if you're trying to contend in the playoffs this year for the cup, or at least to win playoff games. And the Red Wings they could make the playoffs, but that's not necessarily a guarantee. So you still have to preserve the long term. So screw whatever NHL goal you have right now. Do whatever you need to do in favor of the Cossas and the Augustines and the Landon Millers and Carter Guylanders and whoever else of the future. So yeah, if it has to be Lyon, then would I be sad to lose him as a goalie on talent and on, honestly, personality? Absolutely. But that to me seems like the most sensible move.
Now, the obvious counter argument most people will give to that is, Husso can't stay healthy. You comfortable with him as an NHL backup? To which the obvious rebuttal is, that's what Jack Campbell's here for.
Yep. Yes. And that's the thing with the whole Jack Campbell thing. I'm almost 100% confident that he is just the injury insurance and the, Cossa just stabilizing him insurance. I think the 3 goalie thing is going to get resolved. It just has to, and I just don't think it makes sense for them to do right now because they just have to, 1, take stock of Ville Husso, and 2, figure out after they take stock, is he going to go on LTIR? Is he even worth trying to keep? And then you figure out what you do from there. There's a million different ways you can do it. Hell, maybe you want to keep all 3 into this season, and then you waive Justin Hall, and no one's going to claim him, so he goes down, and you save a little, whatever. And then you figure that out as the season goes. But I think they're going to figure out the 3 goalie thing in the NHL. And I don't think it's going to come with Campbell being in the AHL or whoever else. I don't think it'll come at the expense of Cossa. I'd be shocked. So it makes sense that the Red Wings are still in this situation. Husso being hurt was such an impediment that you couldn't really solve until training camp because you have to see what you have.
Preseason will help illuminate the path forward. I think we'll see very quickly what any of the goalies are and what they look like and what the path forward may be there.
Now, all this about Cossa, I thought he looked good. Like he did. The NHL goalies to varying degrees, yeah, but Cossa better and better every time you see him in my mind. I thought he showed himself really well.
And how did he get rewarded? A Patrick Kane shootout goal, which I don't know if any NHL goalie would stop, so he shouldn't feel too bad about it.
Yeah, it's a tough scene.
As long as Patrick Kane looked like he was trying, it doesn't look so bad for Cossa.
He never does.
Didn't.
No. He never does.
It looked way too easy.
Patrick, if you ever watch Patrick Kane's eyes on a shootout goal, it is like when we talk about deception and throwing off the defenders or the goalie, like that guy. You can see a video titled Patrick Kane shootout goal. This puck definitely goes in. And the whole time you're watching him come down, you're like, wow, this guy's not going to shoot the puck. He can convince you right then and there. Like his deception with it, like his head fakes and everything, it's really, really good.
Oh, I thought you were going to say his eyes look glazed over because he could do it in his sleep.
Well,
because it does look like he's half asleep on some of these attempts. And it goes in.
As Evan said very diplomatically, some guys are there to shake off the rust and get up to game shape. And I think the more of a veteran you are, the less intense you are in training camp, which is why, you celebrate Sheldon Dries' performance in training camp. That was really awesome. But you don't say Sheldon Dries is going to be a top 6 player for the Red Wings. Good on Sebastian Cossa. We'll see how the goalie thing unfolds. That's going to be one of the stories of the preseason. All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about the Red Wings, what's coming up in preseason lineup, and lots more. Some other notes from training camp as we jump back in here. I think something that Derek Lalonde said about the alternate captain, so the A that was on Perron's sweater, that they're going to now decide where that goes. They're not rushing it, he said, which isn't a surprise. They want to see who emerges. He talked about evaluating the team and the leadership group as a whole and, talked about a lot of guys, but he did go out of his way to say Seider and Raymond's name specifically. So I wonder if this isn't the start of when you start to see those guys, whether or not it's happening already in the room. the face of the team is Larkin, Seider, Raymond. And that often does get reflected by the letters on the sweater. So we'll see if that's happening all at once or if it's just, Seider this year, what have you. But I wouldn't be surprised to see one of those guys get it. Other than that, I think Berggren, Brandsegg-Nygard, and some other names are of interest for people. Anything kind of jump out at you for either of those guys or anyone else that we haven't chatted about so far as training camp wrapped?
I am more curious about the captaincy. My prediction is we're going to get a rotating one.
Boring. I hate rotating.
Not rotating through players. I've seen teams do this in the past where it might be Seider's at home, Raymond's on the road type of thing.
Yeah. Okay, that I'm actually cool with.
Yeah, because this team these players, I should say, just made long-term commitments to this team and this organization. They are going to be cornerstones of it for a while. And if they're not going to give it to both of them, it would make sense to let them share it in the short term because there's no reality. It's not theirs in the long term, right?
Oh, absolutely. It might feel foreign, but this is the first time that the Red Wings have had a core this good since the last time they were a playoff team, to state the obvious. So, yeah, you kind of forget, but teams do make these guys the face of your team with the letters on the sweater. With Brandsegg-Nygard, I think Lalonde's comments on him all weekend, it's as expected. For him to come over and even get a taste of camp was a pleasant surprise, I think, for Red Wings fans. And the question really for him is, do you go back to Grand Rapids or do you go back to play in the SHL? And that's really the calculus for him. He's not in the mix. There's too much of an uphill climb for him as a developing prospect to even really sniff a full-time Red Wings roster spot. And, there's too many guys ahead of him. But still, it doesn't mean he's been a failure or anything like that. Not at all. It's just there's different purposes to having these players at camp on a case-by-case scenario. And with Berggren, the conversation's been as continued, like the offensive talent in the nose for the offensive zone. That's not ever a question. It's how much can they trust his defensive game and his responsibility all around the ice. And that's going to be the continued focus. Evan, your point earlier, training camp is one thing and how you practice is one thing. But as a fan, when you watch preseason games, that's going to illuminate, I think, a lot of the decision-making that you're going to see coming forward for the Red Wings. Okay. That's training camp. The preseason schedule coming up, they have a home-and-home against Chicago. So that's in Chicago on Wednesday, the 25th, and then on Friday, the 27th at the LCA. The 28th, the Pittsburgh Penguins at the LCA, and the 30th against Buffalo in Buffalo. I always maintain the preseason is too long. And then they have Pittsburgh on the road, Toronto at home, Ottawa at home, and then Toronto on the road. There's no hard and fast rule as to how teams do their preseason games. You're not going to see the same players go to every preseason game. They kind of split it up into a more or less A and B team as they whittle down the roster, and it'll get changed over time. The general rule of thumb, as the NHL has gone over the years, is that your big names play the home games because your fans come and they pay to come to preseason games and you want to show them the big names. And the guys who are fighting for spots, they earn it on the road. It's not completely that way. You're going to see exceptions to the rule in some positions where you're focusing on a guy just getting as many reps as possible. So you'll see that differ there. But by and large, I think that's what to expect. So 8 preseason games has always been too many for me. I think they should cap them out at 4 and call it a day.
As soon as people started talking about the potential 84 game regular season where they could balance the schedule a little better, there was a lot of pushback to it. And obviously it's too many games, but then my counterpoint to it is always, well, if you're pulling them out of the preseason, who cares? I'd rather the extra 2 regular season games than 8 preseason games.
Yeah, fully agree. You find a way so the calendar doesn't run even longer into the spring and summer. It's silly.
We'll pull the last 2 preseason games out and the season starts a week earlier. Great. Problem solved.
And then Moritz Seider, obviously having signed recently, will be in Detroit for practice starting Tuesday. So the next time you really see the Red Wings take the ice, Moritz Seider will have been in the mix by then. And that's Red Wings training camp on to preseason, and the season is just around the corner.
It's happening so fast.
I know. It was so funny, the rush of the end of last season where every single thing happened in a 12-hour span, and then it felt like nothing for a good amount of time. And now it feels like the ramp up is just as fast as the lead down from the end of last season.
It's going to be the home opener October 10th before we know it.
Okay, Let's jump into some NHL news here. Did you guys see the news with Braxton Whitehead, who said he has verbally committed to Arizona State, making him the first member of a CHL team to attempt to play hockey in the NCAA, D1 U.S. hockey, since the lawsuit was filed challenging the NCAA's, forever ban on players that it deemed to be professionals, including those from the CHL. So the whole CHL, NHL, NCAA agreement is here and come to a head, and now you're starting to see, despite NCAA coaches being in support of the ban, you're probably looking at CHL players playing in the NCAA sooner rather than later.
I know this is a huge conversation to get into the nitty-gritty of it, because obviously there's upsides and there's downsides. For us casual idiot hockey fans, this needs to happen. It's condensing the talent to bring up the product of the CHL, first of all, because then you see less of the Macklin Celebrinis or whoever going to play in the USHL versus the OHL, WHL, wherever, because they can play their first 2, 3, whatever years in the WHL, knowing that they have a commitment to BU, Boston College, ASU, wherever, whatever the school might be. So you might not get the full 4 or 5 years out of some of these superstars, but the CHL gets 1 or 2. So that's a huge win for them. The NCAA, it's a huge win because they get the seasoned veterans, the overagers, the guys who aren't going to go play in the NHL, AHL, wherever, but are still really damn good hockey players. It's almost hard to understate how good some of these overagers are in the OHL or the CHL without them having the benefit of a long NHL career after. Where this is going to hurt hockey, it's going to be at the tier 2 levels. The BCHL, U Sports, the USHL, all these secondary leagues that usually have this way around the CHL NCAA thing that will pull in these players, they're going to get really hurt. U Sports is going to get hurt because all the top CHL overagers are going to go to the States now. Not all, most. The BCHL and the USHL are going to get hurt because the top prospects who want to play in the NCAA might still now go play 2 years in the CHL instead.
I think for me, where I sort of land on this at a very high level is I want more options for the players. I don't want a 16-year-old making a decision that hinders them later on just because they made that choice to play in the CHL or the NCAA or what have you. And I think my other thought on this is, this is going to force Canadian universities, the tier 2 leagues, to really up their programs to make them more competitive and incentivize talent to enter into their programs. So at the bottom line for me is I want players to have more equity in what their development path looks like and to drop a lot of these roadblocks that they currently have.
Yeah, the freedom of more choice in a development path, that to me is the plain and simple best argument. Brad's right. There's going to be knock-on and cascading effects to other leagues, and the paradigm shift is probably going to be unpredictable, but it's going to be substantial for these leagues across North America. And frankly, it's going to also affect European leagues too. But that's all a necessary consequence of letting players develop the way one of their choosing or their kind of path forward that makes the most sense based on their play style, where they are in life, where they're from, where they want to live, where their family can support them, all that kind of stuff. And be like, it's a better experience for fans. Brad outlined the reasons. There's no reason to limit talent from going to play in these leagues that can support them best at different phases in their lives. The NCAA and what they've done for hockey is, I still think, underappreciated. And it's not a secret anymore, though. It hasn't been that way for decades. And at the same time, the reciprocal of having those guys come over and playing in the CHL or wherever else sooner, there's just too many benefits. You figure it out as you go, and some guys lower down the totem pole are going to suffer because of this, and that sucks. But at the end of the day, it's better for hockey and hockey's development and getting talent and creating talent and fostering talent. You're going to have fewer guys fizzling out because they weren't in the right situation. If you have all the talent in the world, but geographically or financially you just couldn't be in the right situation, that's the stupidest thing to me. Or if you're a late bloomer and you can't go play NCAA hockey and you overage out of like, it's just dumb the way it's set up right now. So I'm happy to see this far too late, but I'm happy to see this wall slowly start to come down.
You can sort of see why these leagues protect their interests. Obviously, they fear the talent drain into the other leagues. But like I said, if they're afraid of that, improve and innovate your product and incentivize players to stay or come into your league. Not everyone is going to be a 16-year-old phenom and leave for the NCAA once they turn 18. Some guys might be playing in their hometown and they want to stay close to their family. It's just like any other human nature. I think they just need to really drop a lot of these roadblocks.
100% agree. Speaking of dropping roadblocks, this Amazon NHL series that's supposed to be the best thing we've had since the original HBO 24/7 series, oh man, is that looking to be good, because it's been reported that some teams and players and player agents are uncomfortable with some of the scenes that are going to make it in and the fact that they had zero creative control.
Great.
In the words of one D. Glover, good.
Is this not an entertainment product? Is the NHL not for our entertainment?
I promise you, players are going to get flamed, and anytime you jump into the entertainment and dramatization of real life, stuff's going to be dramatized. Anyone who's watched Drive to Survive or Full Swing or any of those sports reality series, like, stuff's going to be dramatized. When you step into that space, there's a price to pay because fans are going to be intense about it, but fans are going to be intense about it. They're going to care. It's going to grow the game. It's going to be entertaining. Ever since Mike Babcock chased that cameraman out of the room in 24/7, I feel like we've not had this kind of access as fans. As usual, Mike Babcock ruined something for people. Those series were the gold standard and the kind of insights that you never really saw, and that access you never really saw from a fan's point of view into the behind the scenes of what it's like to be an NHLer.
We've been preaching for something like this to return probably since we started the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
So the fact that this is on the horizon and players, agents, the league are somewhat timid about it, all the better for us.
That's a great sign. If the status quo of the NHL that's kept them with the slowest overall growth compared to other major sports leagues is shaking, that's good. You need to shake things up.
Coming from the league that what was the commercial they were airing the one year? No soap operas, just hockey.
Ugh.
There's a reason soap operas have been popular for over 50 years, NHL. People want the drama. I think you said it before we started recording, but if it doesn't make the teams uncomfortable, it's not worth watching.
No soap operas, just hockey was written by someone who's never seen Tim Stützle try to draw a penalty.
Gary Bettman, not a fan of The Young and the Restless.
And that's why they fell behind the NBA.
Yep.
Speaking of the Ottawa Senators, Michael Andlauer was created in a lab using all the inverse qualities of Eugene Melnyk.
Yes, he was.
How funny is everything that comes out of his mouth?
Intentionally. Because a lot of what Melnyk said was funny, but...
Yes.
For all the wrong reasons.
If Melnyk was a character in a book, I'd be like, that's a bit on the nose.
This is too unrealistic. No one would create a villain like this.
Wait, you're telling me this guy got an organ donation from a fan and then tried to move the team later that year?
Like, that's exactly what I was like, that's just bad writing. Anyhow, Andlauer, let's start with the arena thing, the LeBreton Flats area, and to move Ottawa. Right now, the Ottawa Senators aren't actually in Ottawa. They are in Canada, and there's one major thoroughfare between Ottawa and Canada, and it's a pain to get to. And the thing about Ottawa is it's very cold, and it turns into an episode of Ice Road Truckers at some point in the year. So they've been trying to move the team downtown for some time. And LeBreton Flats is this development that they were supposed to be in the first time, and Melnyk bottled the whole thing, and then there's lawsuits, whatever. All this full circle, LeBreton Flats seems to be where they're going to land eventually. And that's big news, as well as Andlauer coming out and saying all the right things of, like, we don't want to take public money for this. We want to do this right. I don't want fans, paying $30 for a beer or 200 whatever bucks for a ticket.
It'll be $40 for that beer.
Yeah, that's right. Like that's the kind of ownership sports needs.
And that is the type of thing that brings fans to the arena when the team is bad.
Yes.
If they can get behind the ownership group and they don't just see this conglomerate of corporations, Toronto, fans will back that.
No, Toronto, they merged. It's just Rogers now.
Sorry,
they're
conglomerate.
And they'll flip it to someone else, and it's all the same.
Yeah, because Ottawa and Andlauer, I think his mindset's on the right track here, even from like a pure business standpoint, because 2017, was it, Ottawa made the conference finals and wasn't even selling out games. His number one priority needs to be that barn needs to be full every game. And this is a phenomenal start to accomplishing that task.
It's a wise financial investment too, right? Like when the evaluation of the Ottawa Senators comes out, arena location is probably number one on the docket for that. Like if you do not have a downtown arena, you're losing valuation there. So for him to, privately invest and privately build the new arena, this is going to be a massive financial success for him.
What did he say about the first round pick and Gary Bettman?
He said something like Gary Bettman gave me a call, and the first thing I said is, I hope this isn't going to be me losing another first round pick next year.
Look, a guy who says he doesn't want to take public funds for the arena and wants to move him back into downtown and just shit talks and gets at Gary Bettman every opportunity he gets. I'm sorry, I know Red Wings fans and Senators fans have a feud, but that guy's for the people.
Oh, yeah.
He's for the people.
One of the things we pride ourselves on this podcast is we admit when we're wrong. We were all bummed when it was just another faceless businessman that took over the Ottawa Senators, and we owe that man an apology. We were very wrong. He's probably the most entertaining option we could have got.
I don't care. I actually thought it, because with all the hullabaloo about who's going to buy it and the celebrities and stuff, I was like, man.
Ryan Reynolds was almost an NHL owner.
Well, the joke the whole time was, it's like you have Snoop Dogg involved and all these other actors and Ryan Reynolds, and it's just going to be some boring businessman. And it ended up being some boring businessman. So we thought.
I actually have a great story now that we're talking about this. I'll save it for overtime, though.
That's great sales. Good job.
You're welcome.
Okay. Let's jump into some player-specific news. One, Jeremy Swayman still not signed despite initial reports that he was signed, then he wasn't. I know we've been talking about this for a while, but it's of interest. An Atlantic Division team who can't sign their only option to be a starting goalie, who has gone through arbitration. We'll see where that one goes. And then across to the Western Conference, if you're wondering how Edmonton's going to do all their cap stuff this year, as cup competitive teams do, like Vegas does, Vander Kane's had surgery and he's not going to be back before January, February at absolute earliest. That'll bleed into March, probably, I'd guess. And
I'm guessing right around mid-April, he'll be good to go.
Yeah. So, as is tradition, you'll see all that come about.
That Boston thing could be interesting, because if he's not starting the season, they can't run with Korpisalo, can they? He was terrible last year. Actually, potential Alex Lyon landing spot. If they...
Who is their AHL goalie? What's his last name?
Oh, yeah, I know. Is it?
And he's good.
Is it Busey?
I don't know.
That's unlike.
I'm not confident.
What do you want it to be, Ryan?
You know what I want it to be. You know what I want to hear on the air.
God, I can't.
And Boston, run back. I know the broadcasting team has changed, but you run it back. That's what we all want to hear. I'll never forget. At the end of the day, we're all just grown children.
Yes.
Okay. That's enough. This has been a fun hodgepodge episode. Let's jump into overtime on this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Overtime is brought to you again by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. The bonus overtime episodes, which Evan just referred to, where you're going to hear a great story, inside access, the bonus off-season content, the Discord, the giveaways, all that and lots more. You allow us to run Winged Wheel Podcast nights in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings and the Grand Rapids Griffins. You allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation, and you also allow us to produce other great content, like having Max Spaltman on as a contributor for WWP, Prashant Iyer and Sean Shapiro for Expected by Whom, all that and lots more. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. All right, first question here from Brandon Nimps says, once a player is drafted by an NHL team, how much support and resources are provided to help with development versus just having contract rights and letting them develop on their own? There's always a base level of the player comes to these camps, these prospect camps or whatever, and you generally do keep in touch with whatever system they're in. and more fringy prospects, you're going to be less involved. If you're a guy like, MBN, then of course it's a very, involved process right off the hop. But at the very least, you have the assistant GM, head of player development, that kind of thing, kind of reaching out to you pretty regularly. It is a case-by-case basis, and it also depends on how robust the system is that you got drafted into, and then how good you are as a player.
And where they're playing too, right? Like if someone's in the MHL and the Red Wings don't have a whole ton of resources there versus someone playing in the Swedish Elite League, there's going to be ample resources everywhere.
Yeah. All right. Moving on here. Next question. The Dandy Man Can says, I heard a rumor there's someone with experience playing defense in the pod. Yeah, it's Evan. If so, what would they think about playing Mo with Edvinsson during the final minutes of a 1-goal game to tie or protect? I don't think it's a stretch to say Simon should be the second best D-man we have offensively or defensively by the end of the year, but it does mess with pair chemistry to do it that much. What do you think? The D core can't afford to have them play together all the time, even if he becomes the second best quickly.
My opinion, I think in general, would be I would love to have my best players out there at all time.
Yeah, pairings and all that kind of stuff kind of go out the window in extreme situations like that. I'm of the mindset, and depending on how your roster is built, you should throw 5 forwards out on the power play if you don't have a proper power play quarterback. There's no reason. Final minute of a game, 1-goal lead, throw 5 defensemen on the ice for all I care. Like, get the guys who are going to best fit the situation you are in. And obviously these teams, they practice every situation, right? Just because a guy is not on a line together or not on a pairing together doesn't mean they're not playing this scenario together in practices leading up to it.
You see it happen quite a few times where they'll have 2 centermen, especially as in a defensive zone start at the end of the game, they'll have 2 centermen out on that line in case one of them gets kicked out.
Yeah. Yeah, once you're in that, like you said, Brad, extreme scenario, all bets are off, and you just game for those specific seconds. Jack Enthroletto says, I've been wondering if Shai Buium could be a valuable trade piece, in particular to Minnesota. His brother Zeev could become a star D-man for them, and they might like the idea of brothers playing together to keep them both hungry. Does Minnesota have anything Detroit needs right now, and is Shai worth losing to try and make up the Buium brothers a marketable brother pairing in the NHL? Do you think another team would want Shai enough that they'd take a Hall or a Husso in a bigger deal? Thanks for the pod. The reality is Shai Buium, and this isn't a slight on him as a prospect, but doesn't have enough value to drive a deal one way or another. Minnesota might have interest in him, but you're not going to see a massive return if that deal does, hypothetically come to fruition.
Yeah, he might net you a second-round pick, but right now, because of his development, you'd probably rather hold on to him. He's more valuable to you than a second-round pick at this current moment in time. I do like where your head's at. I think your logic's just backward. How do we get Zeev should be the question you're asking.
That's right. Poutine Lips says, I feel like the Wings of the 90s was anchored by the strong D of Lidstrom. How does Seider compare in regards to play style on D with Lidstrom's style and Kronwall's as well? So 2 different eras there. How will Edvinsson compare, and what does he fill in with regards to what the Wings are missing from the D-line from a skills and play style perspective? In short, what style is Seider and Edvinsson, and how do they complement one another in skill?
Nobody's like Lidstrom. Let's just get that straight out there. I've never really thought about it, but Seider and Kronwall actually have a lot in common in terms of physicality, good, not elite offense. I think Seider's a better skater than Kronwall was, which would be the big differentiator as to why he's a true number 1D and Kronwall was maybe a fringy 1D at his peak. Edvinsson's kind of a unicorn. A massive defenseman, big mean streak, silky soft hands with the puck, super, super slow and patient in terms of how he addresses the game, especially from a puck on his stick standpoint. Yeah, I could draw a line from Kronwall to Seider with enough comparisons, but I'm struggling for a good comparison with Edvinsson. And that's not just in Detroit, I mean in general.
And it's not a 1-to-1 either. Like the way Kronwall threw hits, well, I'll be surprised if I see another defenseman like that in our lifetimes for the Red Wings. Like that was just, he's notable across the NHL for that. So yeah, stylistically, they do complement each other. They have a lot in common. And, just because one has one attribute doesn't mean the other one lacks it. Like Seider also has silky mitts around the blue line. Sometimes you might say Seider's decision-making with a puck is inherently better and safer than Edvinsson's, but sometimes you see Seider turn the puck over. It's not, perfectly even at all times. And then in the interest of a Seider-Edvinsson conversation, Dead Aim asks, if Edvinsson pans out as a solid number 2 D-man, what are the chances Mo gets a Norris? That's an interesting question. So basically, once Mo gets a true top-pairing defenseman partner, how does that influence his chances to get a Norris?
I think it's a long shot either way. But I think the biggest thing that could get Mo a Norris above all else would be Edvinsson anchoring another pairing and allowing Seider to play half of his games not taking the toughest matchups and going out there and picking on some second and third lines and second and third pairings, because he sure as hell isn't getting those now.
Yeah, it's honestly, hate to say it, but you add a better goaltending situation. Like, it's hard to shine as a defenseman and win a Norris if you're constantly letting goals in and they're not your fault, kind of thing. I know there's advanced stats to kind of see through that, but that's not really the NHL's MO when they look through that kind of thing. But points drive the game. And, you know, if Seider's coming up in an era of Cale Makar and others, it's going to be hard to sell yourself as a Norris candidate if you're not putting up the Quinn Hughes, Cale Makar level points. I don't really love that that's what the award has become for best defenseman, but that's just the reality of it. Erik Karlsson won the Norris with 100 points plus season, and it was a hard argument against it.
That's multiple-time Norris Trophy winner, Erik Karlsson.
Lars Thorzel says, getting ever closer to puck drop in Game 1 and the roster discussions are heating up. Personally, I don't think we'll see any of the kids in the NHL unless the wheels come off completely. Sure, they might be called to play in case of injuries, but I doubt this is the season we'll see a youth revolution. Same thing with the MBN discussion, to be honest. He has a spot in the organization in the SHL that is the most prominent developers of youth in Sweden. In Skellefteå, why on earth should he be rushed to the US? He's young and learning to become a pro. He isn't the player who will propel us into contention for the cup. I think we'll have to be satisfied with getting to watch Berggren and Johansson as the new kids on the block. What do you think?
God, I hope not. And I don't mean that in the super, super pessimistic way it sounds, but if one of these young guys, and all this conversation seems to revolve around specifically Danielson, Kasper, and Mazur, doesn't start kicking the door down soon, it's probably signs of a bigger issue going forward.
Dirty D and the boys says, what are your thoughts on staying in Windsor for Wings games? I got a 10-game package this season. It's my first foray into any kind of season tickets, and I'm staring down the barrel of a ton of hotel expenses. My wife tells me the hotels in Windsor are much cheaper. Is this a viable option?
Are you American? If you make money in USD, that is definitely a wiser financial choice.
You will see how far your dollar goes in Canada. It's hysterical. But
especially in Windsor.
Oh, yeah. The tunnel bus is, I think, operational again out of Windsor, and it's a great, great option. Look for that, and it'll pick you up in Windsor, drive you over through the tunnel, drop you off at the game, and pick you up after the game. And they run multiple buses and just, you know, make your drunk way over there afterwards, and you don't have to worry about driving and parking. And it's COVID, you know, ruined it for a few years, but now that it's back, I think that's a great option. And like, yeah, the hotel prices and Airbnb prices in Detroit are wild. Like, absolutely nuts. When we do Winged Wheel podcast nights, like we fund those. Like, we don't get paid for anything, and one of our biggest expenses is where we stay. It's crazy how many times we've had to like change plans because it's like this is too much money. Like, this is nuts. And so yeah, the dollar will go farther in Windsor, and you might have some more options for hotels that way. So if you're willing to do it, it's absolutely worth it. Okay. We're going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. Thank you to the sponsors of this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast. And thank you to all of our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/Winged Wheel podcast if you want to support the show. And if you want to support the Winged Wheel podcast, but Patreon's not for you, leave us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, leave a thumbs up on YouTube. It does make a big, big difference. Hit subscribe wherever you get your show and tell a friend. And to all of our, actually, I should say, Winged Wheel podcast night at the LCA, wingedwheelpodcast.com/Red Wings. Tickets are scarce. Get yours. It's your last opportunity before they run out. To all of our name level supporters on Patreon, we can't thank you enough. Arjun Shanker, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Victor Zetterberg, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Whitehead, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. at the Cheesebag Navy, Carl Brutina Nanaluski, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Seider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, L, Eric Hill, God Creatives, Give Blood Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam El Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, Jonathan Miller, Kalen Wood, Ligma, Dingus, Haha Got Him, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Raul Pudd, Riley Enright, Ryan Britt, Scott Martin, Skeletor, That's What I Appreciates About You, The New Jackson Five Holes, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Winged Boogie, Iserplan Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, A.A. Ron, A.B., Adam Rose, All Motor No Hands, Ann Stanislavski, Axel Sandy Pelika, Bellingham Acid Balls, Chimkim Nuggets, Chuck Buffchest, the Tarpless Goon, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Leighton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsukes Dangleberries, Eric Nance, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Goon in the Room, Grepsky, new name level supporter, Griffey Boy, Ian, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, Jim, JM Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans Derogatory, John Ingalls, Josh Yelton, Keenan O'Donohue, Brad is Wrong and Plays Like Sprong, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Ophelia, Steven, The Hodag, The Hat 123, Trent Thorough, Wings fan in Chi-Town, Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.